Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm John Harrington, the editor of PRWeek UK. Before we start, I wanted to say a quick word about the upcoming Purpose Awards, which take place on Friday, 6th of June in central London. This isn't any prize-giving event. The Purpose Awards celebrates campaigns that are making real change and the organisations behind them. Whether you're an awards entrant, a shortlisted nominee, or simply want to show your support, do come along. Tickets are selling fast. Visit purposeawards.co.uk for more. Hope to see you there. Today's episode is about cyber attacks and the comms challenges associated with them. It's a downbeat topic, but one that shot up the media agenda following cyber attacks on well-known British companies like the Co-op, Marks & Spencer and Harrods in recent weeks. As we record this, M&S has just released a statement saying it has written to some customers saying some of their personal information has been taken after an attack. So obviously a very, very current issue and an ongoing one. And it remains a big problem generally. 43% of UK businesses reported a cybersecurity breach or attack in the last 12 months, according to government data from April. Slightly down on the 50% in the previous year, I should say, but it's still a very worrying proportion. We have two guests today, one of whom has first-hand experience of a cyber attack at his own company. Jack Richards is Global Head of Integrated and Field Marketing at Onclusive, the media monitoring company that provides analytics services to many PR firms and in-house teams. Onclusive encountered a cybersecurity incident in February 2024. The issues were resolved within a few weeks, thankfully. Jack, we appreciate you joining us. Thank you for being here. Hope you're well today.
I've recovered from all of the sleep deprivation, yeah.
Good to hear. And our other guest is Charlotte McGill from the Burson UK crisis team, who has advised clients on cyber attacks and can offer her perspective. Thanks for joining us, Charlotte. And are you well today as well?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Good, pleasure. So let's get on to the first question. As I say, Jack, apologies in the sense of sort of bringing back what was presumably quite a difficult time a little while ago, but could you give us a little bit of background to the cyber incident, as much as you're able to say, really, and how prepared you were for it in hindsight, looking back now?
Yeah, why not? Why not dig it all back up, John? That's fine.
Sorry.
As you touched on, at the start of 2024, Onclusive's UK business was victim to a cyber attack, a ransomware attack, I should say. It was malicious, it was indiscriminate, and it essentially went about completely pulling apart the systems we use to deliver media monitoring services to our UK and Ireland clients, which I'm sure you will understand is a pretty big issue for a media monitoring business, particularly when we're so embedded into PR practitioners' workflow. It's not just a nice to have, it's something that really supports PR pros' workday. And things were happening really quickly. Communication internally was fragmented, to say the least. And while a command center type setup was assembled quite quickly, the focus was rightly on restoring service, on protecting stakeholders, on looking after staff, many of whom were working sort of 24, 36, 48 hours without a break. And we were sort of liaising with very senior specialist, scary law enforcement and cybersecurity experts. All while this was happening, I wasn't even able to open my laptop. That was the extent of the issue. I wasn't able to log into my Gmail on my phone, into Google Drive, Google Docs. We had to courier a laptop across London to my house in order for me to write anything without it being, in my notepad. So, to cut a long story short, we got through it, as you mentioned. The issue was resolved. We've had an incredibly understanding customer base who I hope can see the end goal and the vision of what Onclusive is building. And since then, and I'm sure we'll go into this, we've put into place what seemed to me as a non-expert and super clever stuff that goes way over my head, some of the most robust sort of expert infrastructure there is from our industry's perspective. From a comms perspective, it's almost a little too late, but I'm trying to see it as an opportunity. We might have been better placed to communicate all that sexy cyber stuff now, had we not encountered that issue and had we been better prepared. And in hindsight, when you talk about sort of preparedness and planning, ultimately, there wasn't a whole lot of it. And that's where I hold my hands up. And that's our biggest learning. there was no real plan. We had prepared for a number of scenarios, as all organizations do. But retrospectively, I think a lot of them were internal risks as opposed to external threats like cyber attacks. And it's always, I think the conversations I've had since are, it won't be us. It will never be us. We're too small or different or niche. And actually, Onclusive is a large business with complex infrastructure that plays a real role. So that's been a pretty steep learning curve, but hopefully that gives you a good picture of what's gone on.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. Thank you for being so candid. I mean, could you give us a few details of what you did do? I mean, was there a case of, were you literally sort of there with, these are a list of our main customers, these are a list of the media that may have been in touch? Was there a particular approach that you took to that? Or was just the fact that you couldn't get in your laptop, did it mean that you basically just had to hope for the best for a while?
An incident like this is obviously incredibly serious, and that's sometimes where plans go out the window slightly. So from our perspective, we needed to, yes, communicate, and yes, communicate quickly, and yes, communicate our regret that this has happened, but also not spend too much time explaining the reasons. I really wanted us to get to the end point. What are we doing about it, and what do you as a customer need to know? What's really challenging, as you alluded to, is when you can't log into a laptop, customer lists don't exist. When everything is single sign-on into our marketing automation systems, that makes things pretty difficult. I should add, actually, during this cyber attack, I was actually on a business trip in Morocco. So I spent 36 hours in a hotel room trying to coordinate some of my team to disseminate these messages. And to your point about customer lists, we are sort of known in the industry for having a pretty good account management team. One of the sort of seen as a people first, customer first business. We have a few dozen account managers, which on a day-to-day basis is probably more than many other vendors. But we also have literally thousands of PR practitioners logging into Onclusive every day. So our communication was mainly on a mass basis, and you guys have reported on this. It was mainly via email. It was mainly coming from our chief exec. It was hourly, daily communication. One thing I do regret, or I'm maybe frustrated by, would be a better phrase, is that we know that there were a lot of customers, too many customers, who weren't receiving our emails, whether that's because they hadn't whitelisted our email address, because they'd caught wind we were having a cyber attack and blacklisted our email address, whether that was because our customer data wasn't up to date, the main contact had moved on, whatever it was. And that really created a perception within our customer base, but also within the industry more broadly, that we weren't being open and that we weren't communicating. From my perspective, that couldn't be further from the truth. If anything, we were often communicating when we didn't have a whole lot to say. And that's another issue entirely. But it's that whole issue of how do you communicate in the digital age without any access to any digital technology? So, yeah, we had I think we grappled with it quite quickly. I think we probably tried 3 different approaches at the same time. And yeah, the biggest challenge was sort of how you communicate when you don't know who to communicate with.
Yeah, I bet. And thank you for taking us through that. Charlotte, from your point of view, how do you find companies usually communicate in the kind of early stages of a cyber attack? And is there anything they tend to get sort of wrong in particular in the early days, or maybe in hindsight wrong?
Absolutely. So, as I'm sure Jack experienced, communicating in those really early stages is such a delicate balancing act for companies. Companies need to balance being able to communicate quickly and transparently, but also really carefully in terms of the detail that they can share. In the early stage of a cyber attack, it's nearly impossible to say what's actually happened in any particular detail. And so a company will tend to communicate by just acknowledging that something is impacting their systems and that they are looking into it. And so by doing this, a company is communicating quite transparently that something's happening and that they're working to resolve it, but then they're also buying themselves a little bit of time to carry out that really important technical investigation that needs to happen in the background. And it's really this more measured approach that I'd say I recommend to clients at Burson. In terms of the language used as well, sometimes companies may be a little bit too quick to pull the trigger and say they've had a cyber attack specifically, because that can lead to a lot of speculation or fear from their stakeholders. It could also prompt a lot of questions that companies at that point don't have the answer to. And that could then lead to customers or employees becoming frustrated at a lack of information, which then ultimately damages a company's reputation. And that's a really delicate balancing act that I try to advise on for all my clients at Burson. In terms of things that can go wrong, some companies, in their quest to be as transparent as possible, they may overshare some information that isn't 100% confirmed. And that's confirmed from both a technical and a legal perspective. And it can take, from my experience, a lot of time to understand how a cyber incident happens. And in some cases, you may never get a definitive reason why an incident occurred. And so we've seen time and time again, companies might commit to information early on that then turns out to be incorrect as the investigation progresses, leading them to then have to go back on their word, which ultimately erodes trust. And that's why I would say having a cybercom specialist in particular is so vital, because it is really a minefield to ensure that companies are able to communicate effectively without causing that panic. It's really all about building and maintaining the trust that a company has with its stakeholders.
Yeah, no, that definitely chimes. And interesting to get your point of view on some of those things that Charlotte was saying, Jack. I mean, I think that idea of that balance between undersharing and oversharing seems like a really key one. Was that something that you and Onclusive had to grapple with during the incident?
Yeah, I think it's that classic thing. Everyone's a comms expert, aren't they? And there are lots of people in that room who have lots of very loud opinions. And ultimately that, to me, it comes back to the importance of comms having a seat at the table and part of that decision-making process, and not being reduced to a tactical function that's just told to send an email that legal has written, for example, Charlotte, that hasn't been done in consultation with IT or with sales or with account managers or whatever else. On that topic, the irony of us being in the reputation business is not lost on me in that scenario. We literally spend time working on reputation reports for our clients, talking to them about all of these things. But I think, as Charlotte touched on, the sort of nuance whilst you're in it and everything is happening at a million miles an hour, and different stakeholders need different things as well, and being able to sort of segment that messaging, communicate differently to different people while still having that overarching message was something we found really difficult, particularly because you can't always control the narrative fully yourselves. When you have things happening on LinkedIn, for example, when you have competitors perhaps spreading misinformation, when you have great journalists at places like PRWeek following up with us. All of them have different needs, but different intentions as well. And in the moment, it's quite hard to distill what is right for that stakeholder at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it'd be good to know how things evolved, really, how the sort of approach to comms changed as the crisis went on. What sort of insights could you give us around that, do you think, and a sort of shift in strategy, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, it's ongoing, to be honest. I'd be lying if it wasn't. The way I sort of see it is really in three phases. Is that immediate response, which, as Charlotte said, is so important. It sets the tone for the rest of your communication and your engagement with your stakeholders. I mean, we were petrified. We were like a rabbit in headlights, to be completely honest. And that's where we start to distribute things like holding statements, building things like messaging frameworks. But of course, they are evolving as the situation evolves. It's not as cut and dry as something having happened. In many ways, it would have been easier if it was, a more tangible crisis. Then phase two really was our ongoing response, where we remained informative, but we really had a shift to something much more human and much more authentic. I'm not saying we were seeking any sympathy from anyone, but trying to bring a human face to quite technical, scary, boring scenario was important for us, because so many of the people, sort of fielding those calls and emails for clients, literally tens of thousands of inbound emails, are people who have been up for hours, who have no more information than what they're being given. So for us, it was sort of that shift from centralized communication to decentralized communication, trusting and equipping particularly account managers with the information they need to have conversations with their clients who they understand far better than I will, sitting in an office somewhere. And then thirdly is post-incident. I am not naive. We still have work to do. We are still meeting people. We are still answering questions. We are proactively building. I mean, I'm a nerd, but what I find quite exciting is we're proactively building almost like a trust center where you can see the steps that we've taken and the work that we've done that not only gets us up to standard, but puts us far ahead of industry standard. And we're remaining transparent. John, you will know that we've spoken at PRWeek events. We've hosted roundtables. We do regular client lunches on our own as well. So that ongoing piece is, well, it's ongoing, and it's really front of mind in all that we're doing. And every other piece of sort of marketing activity or communications activity or PR, we do come back to that question of what will our clients think? How are our clients feeling? And yeah, that's top of mind at the moment.
Thank you for that. And Charlotte, what do you make of that point about when you're looking at crisis planning, that you also very much take into account the longer term element of it? That in a sense, crisis doesn't end when the immediate crisis is over. It'd be good to reflect on that a little bit and see how important that is.
Absolutely. I mean, a significant part of our work at Burson isn't just the response to a crisis. In fact, we often say that the best way to respond to a crisis is through good preparation. So you need to ideally have all of these plans and processes in place, which can include things as simple as just printing off a document if you're not able to access your laptop like Jack experienced. And then once the actual response is over, it's then another battle, which is to rebuild the trust that may have been lost during an incident. And this is something that as a team we will come in and advise on, because it is another essential element. Many people might think a crisis is just the live incident, but there's so much both before and after that you have to focus on as well.
Absolutely. And one thing that's worth picking up, I think, is who kind of fronts this. And I know that in the initial stages of Marks and Spencer's cyber attack, they're given quite a lot of praise with the CEO fronting the response essentially and personalising it. Don't need to necessarily talk about them particularly, but do you think in general it's good to have one person being the sort of respondent, and does it make sense for that person to be the most senior person effectively?
So I think, first of all, it is so important to acknowledge how challenging these incidents can be for companies that are household names. In the past, we might not have seen cyber attacks being front page news that much. However, now it is very much the case, and it's something that can and likely will impact an organization for months. And for these kinds of incidents, it is so important that the companies seize the narrative quickly and ensure that their story isn't defined by any speculation or misinformation. And we've seen this happen recently, where these companies are able to do this by speaking directly and clearly to their customers, very much limiting that speculation and also providing transparency and honesty. And in general, I would say it is very effective choosing a CEO to be a spokesperson, because it also shows that the organization is taking the incident incredibly seriously, and it reassures stakeholders the company's actively managing the situation and they're very much taking control of the narrative. Now, sometimes it might not necessarily make sense for the CEO to be the main spokesperson, and that's something that will vary for each organization. However, it is something that we've seen quite a lot of success with recently.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, Charlotte, another thing I wanted to ask about, a real problem here is about the different priorities. And Jack was talking very much about all of the different stakeholders involved in when these sorts of things happened. How do you sort of balance those comms priorities when these hit? You know, you've got your customers, your employees, the media. In some instances, maybe there were politicians get involved in these kind of things. I mean, how on earth do you try and bring that all together and make it happen on a practical basis? It must be extremely difficult.
Absolutely. It's another one of those balancing acts that you have to deal with for a cyber crisis. And I think the first thing you have to do is really take a step back and think who needs to hear from you first and how should they hear from you. So for a cyber attack specifically, we'd recommend companies should start by prioritizing those who've already been directly affected. And that doesn't just necessarily mean customers who are unable to use systems, place orders, but it also means the employees too. And so focusing on that initial sphere of those impacted, you can then start looking a bit more broadly and communicating with those who aren't directly affected, but should still know about it. Because if a stakeholder hears about an incident directly from the impacted company rather than through the grapevine, it still shows that you're taking it seriously and it still helps build that trust and that reputation. And I think one of the most important things with all of these incredibly disparate groups is ensuring when you're communicating with them that those core messages and that information is all consistent that's being shared. And that doesn't mean a one-size-fits-all approach. You aren't going to be sending the same thing to a board member as you are to a customer, but you need to make sure that you're communicating to each stakeholder about the things that they care about and tailoring the messages to those specific concerns. So for investors, it could be remediation actions. For customers, they will be more concerned about data. Employees will be concerned about when they can get back online. And it's really considering that balance between timeliness, empathy, accuracy, transparency. And a lot of that can be, I suppose, predetermined or predefined by having a communications plan in advance, so that a lot of that difficult thinking is already done for you.
Jack, does a lot of that resonate with you and your experience?
Hindsight is a wonderful thing, isn't it? But no, it absolutely does. I think something that we've taken forward in our planning is not only having a far more robust communications and crisis plan, but actually understanding our stakeholders a lot better from a vendor perspective. And having worked at two other vendors in this space, it's very easy to bucket stakeholders. We work with PR, comms, and marketing practitioners. It is nowhere near that simple, and it's only when it all hits the fan that becomes abundantly clear. So the thing that resonates most with me from what Charlotte said is really understanding your audience, understanding what matters to them, and understanding how you can build trust and open up a clear line of communication, I would say.
Okay, so another element that was touched upon earlier on was about the role of comms when the crisis hits. I guess it's an obvious thing to ask, but how important is it that comms is very much involved? But perhaps more importantly, how do we as an industry ensure that comms definitely is at the centre of this when there are so many competing elements in a business that might want to take a lead?
I can jump in as someone who has voiced concerns in this area, we could say. When we've had some of these conversations with our clients and the industry at large, the first thing they say is, oh my goodness, did you not have a PR agency or a communications leader or a communications plan, a dedicated PR team? The answer is no, we don't, or we didn't rather, which is shocking for a communications business, but there we go. And that is because, generally speaking, M&A, private equity businesses are in the business of lead gen, pipeline creation, and revenue generation. And that link between reputation, trust, communication, and the outcome of revenue and shareholder profit is too intangible often for private equity businesses who are building new organizations to understand. We didn't have a seat at the table in the same way. We were very fortunate, and we are very fortunate to have a CMO who really values communications and trusts members of the team who maybe have more experience in that area. But we didn't have a seat at the table in terms of someone who really gets it. Now we do. We weren't viewed as being a strategic function from a communications perspective. We were told to just draft something, just PR it, just post it, all that sort of stuff. We'd draft a statement, and every man, woman and their dog would have an opinion or a comment or a suggestion in the doc. And I'll tell you what, they soon relied on us. I think another learning is we were running on instinct rather than data a lot of the time, which again, for a business which literally sells data is objectively mad. We now use our own tools, which we did not do before. We now have, you best believe, crisis alerts set up on Onclusive Social, our social listening vendor. Before now, I've used social listening to sort of monitor and prepare for crises. But those social listening platforms didn't monitor LinkedIn, for example. I work in B2B. I need to know what people are saying on LinkedIn, not Instagram. So, from a preparedness perspective, I think we've done far better. I think a lot of my regret when it comes to how we were able to grapple with communication comes down to the fact that we weren't in the room in the first instance to take hold of decisions and lead conversation. Now we are, and I think hopefully our customers will agree that now that we are, we're doing far better when it comes to communication.
I feel any client that would kind of ever make the point of we don't necessarily need to invest that much in comms and what's the benefit should probably be sent this podcast and made to listen to the dangers of not having a good comms plan and not listening to comms, I would say. So thank you so much for that. And I think that's entirely valid.
I will pitch on their behalf for more budget for PR.
Do it. I'm sure everyone listening to this will be right behind you, and I certainly will. I mean, obviously, your business has learnt that lesson. Charlotte, do you think generally businesses are learning these lessons? Is this kind of crisis preparedness element, whether it's linked directly to cyber attacks or not, is that something that is getting through to the absolute top of businesses more these days, would you say?
Yes, so more and more we are seeing companies look at the news and see organizations that they would think are incredibly advanced suffer from a cyber attack. And that has led to the realization that it can affect everyone. And that's often something that we say to people. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And it can sound quite frightening, but I think there are stats showing that there's a cyber attack every 39 seconds. And in the UK, you said at the start, there are so many businesses that are being impacted by it. And by bringing in this preparedness work early, clients are beginning to realize that it will save them significant time, significant money, and save them from significant reputational damage in the long run. So we always insist that clients should really think about preparedness first and foremost.
Thank you for that, Charlotte. Jack, it would be good to maybe get a couple of ideas of some specifics that relate to how Onclusive's changed its crisis comms plan after the incident. Is there anything you can share with us about that?
PR agencies listening, don't pitch me, please. We now have a fantastic agency partner in place, mainly from a sort of outsourced press office perspective. As amazing as they are, I feel really strongly that a PR agency will never be able to fully understand what's happening in real time. You have to invest in that process and those elements in order to empower them to do their role effectively. And that's where that getting a seat at the table is so important. Likewise, we're building out our communications function and processes. And I think this is a really interesting way of approaching it. We first appointed an internal comms role. And for me, that's important because we were so siloed. And if we couldn't even communicate with one another effectively, how on earth were we going to communicate with those stakeholders externally that were so important to us? And he's been great at getting us to have a think about how we approach things moving forward, putting into place those best practices. As Charlotte says, even printing things out maybe, or getting things across to our personal drives, all that good stuff. We've also in order to rebuild trust in this area, we know that we need to marry communication with action. It's all very well and good saying how great we are, but we've got to demonstrate it. So I alluded earlier to sort of building out some of those trust signals, those resources that demonstrate our robustness in this area, which we've been doing. And the final element, I guess, which is less tangible, but is super important, is again what I alluded to earlier. The communication side of this is not over. It will not be over for some time. Speaking openly, John, when you invited me to join the podcast, it was a conversation internally. Do we really want to be known as the cyber people forever? And my answer is, to be honest, we probably will be known as the cyber people for some time. I hope that we're also known as the best vendor for social listening with TikTok and LinkedIn. I hope we're known as the people who have just released self-service monitoring tool 360. I hope we're known as the people that do planning and database, but we're probably also going to be known as the cyber monitoring people. So we're going to own the narrative. We're going to be honest. We're going to be transparent. We're going to communicate authentically. We're going to do all of the stuff that we tell our clients to do and all of the stuff we wish we'd have done in the first instance. And aside from all of that other stuff, that is the thing that we'll be focusing on for the next few months and years. And it's going to be pretty relentless, but we're going to keep on going.
Yeah. And I remember when I did message you about this, I thought chances are you probably wouldn't want to relive it. So I think, I really appreciate the fact that you've come on and, as I say, been so candid about all of those difficulties, because I'm sure there's a lot of lessons to be had for anyone listening to this. And it also accentuates that point that it could happen to anyone. It's not just the big household names, it's B2B companies like Onclusive that are seemingly equally as likely to be hit by these sorts of attacks. So, it does feel like a universal message.
On that point, John, I think you referenced some of the cyber attacks that have happened more recently with supermarket brands in particular. Something that I would also reflect upon from a corporate reputation perspective is why M&S, for example, seem to have weathered the storm well. I think aside from them being a heritage brand, it's because they've done some really strong work to build trust and reputation. And I don't think it is as simple as, it taking however long to build a reputation and a second to lose it. If you have those really strong foundations over time with a concerted effort, I believe through my experience that you're better placed to weather that storm. I felt a little bit hard done by during the Onclusive incident in that we were 2 years post carve out. We were completely rebuilding our tech stack. We hadn't been without our challenges. We were a brand with legacy recognition, but also a whole new brand. So I think it also alludes to the importance of brand and reputation more generally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. These things don't exist in a vacuum. And I think this is a really good lesson. Do you have any reflections on that, Charlotte, about the sort of the wider challenges of reputation and the wider importance of maintaining a reputation outside of these crises so, it's easier to deal with them if and when they do hit?
Yes, absolutely. From some of the clients that I've supported through a cyber crisis have had thousands of employees, some have had 4 employees, and ditto for the number of customers they have. And the ones that will always fare best are the ones that have that strong reputation amongst their customers to begin with, because one of the key points with any particular crisis, particularly a cyber crisis, as we've already alluded to, is the fact that they can take an incredibly long time to be resolved. And so being able to retain that control of the narrative as these incidents continue to develop can be really challenging. We can see a lot of new narratives, a lot of speculation form in the media, a lot of frustration. And if a company has already done the groundwork with its customers, with its employees, then they will fare better and they will be given a little bit more grace than, say, those who haven't. And then they'll be in a good position to, whilst they're carrying out the task of rebuilding that trust and that reputation. And the way that Jack is saying that Onclusive is doing it is exactly right. It's about, I suppose, putting your money where your mouth is, proving with your actions that you are continuing to learn and grow from the experience.
Very true. So we're getting towards the end of our session, but before we do, I wanted to ask if you could both please sort of offer perhaps 2 top tips for handling comms if a cyber attack does hit. I know we've covered a lot of ground, but it would be good to sort of, encapsulate it if you can in 2 each. Charlotte, would you like to go first?
Absolutely. So I think the first thing that I would say, and I've mentioned it a couple of times already, is that preparation really is half the battle. Every company ideally should have cybersecurity communications protocols in place, and then also protocols that cover how a company should proceed operationally. Because when it all hits the fan, when things are incredibly frantic, having something that is already there in place is invaluable. And then the second bit of advice, second top tip that I would give would be don't hesitate to bring in experts at an early stage. So responding to a cyber incident, it requires a lot of resource, a lot of specialized technical knowledge, and that can be incredibly challenging for a company to handle. And so an early intervention by technical specialists, legal specialists, cybercom specialists, it can save time, money, and reputational damage.
Great, thank you. And Jack?
You've stolen a couple of mine, Charlotte, but I'll let you off. I think for me, what I have learned is to take a very stakeholder or consumer-centric approach. One size does not fit all. Prioritize affected parties' concerns, understand who those affected parties are, demonstrate active problem solving, understand the difference between what information is necessary and what might be oversharing, even in a cyber incident. So yeah, stakeholder centricity is important. And in the absence of being able to include my other one, I will go for tool up. Make sure you are equipped to, where possible, predict crises. For example, you may remember about 10 years ago, phones were blowing up in people's hands and homes. That was first identified through social listening. You need to be able to get to the journalists that will be writing about your story so that you can influence and join the conversation. You need the right database and press release distribution to do that. Sometimes we need to sneak out bad news. We've all done it. So using tools that will help you hijack the news agenda are great. And then monitoring the impact. Monitor what you've done. It's a terrible time, and your metrics are going to be going through the floor. But let's monitor the outcome. Let's demonstrate the impact that we as PR and communications practitioners can have. And let's try and turn something which I can attest is incredibly negative into something positive that demonstrates our value.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's a great way to end it. That is all the time we have. And obviously, it's an issue that we're going to keep a close eye on PR Week. I'm no doubt return to later down the line. But thanks so much to Jack and to Charlotte for sharing your insights. We really appreciate it. Thanks for coming along.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you could leave a review, please, wherever you access PR Week's Beyond the Noise podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.